Just about to get going with my analysis and reading of the second chapter of Aravinda Diga's The White Tiger. The second chapter is called The Second Night. If you haven't watched my video of the first chapter, I recommend that you look at that first before accessing this one. All right, let's go. For the desk of His Excellency Wen Jiabao, now probably fast asleep in the Premier's office in China. From the desk of his midnight educator on matters entrepreneurial, the White Tiger, Mr. Premier. So, what does my laughter sound like? Before we read on, remember that at the end of the last chapter, his last line was 8 months later, I slit Mr. Ashok's throat. So he's ended by shocking the reader in the last chapter. Opens up kind of a little bit lighthearted, doesn't he? So, what does my laughter sound like? What do my armpits smell like? And when I grin, is it true, as you no doubt imagine by now, that my lips widen into a devil's rictus? Now, does anyone know what a rictus is? I don't know, have any of you been watching The Walking Dead?
Yes.
Have you watched season 7?
No.
No, there's this psycho in season 7 who's really scary. And he just smiles the whole time, even when he's like murdering people. And he just doesn't stop. And I imagine him having this kind of fixed grin. And I think it's associated with kind of not meaning it. You know, there's a smile, but behind the smile is this evilness, you know. So that's the rictus, the devil's rictus. Now, I think he's playing with the reader here. I think he's teasing the reader a little bit. And I think this image of him cutting this man's throat is such a horrible one. But he's kind of teasing the reader a little bit and saying, oh, you're imagining me to be some crazy devil. Only to now, hopefully, he's going to now bring in his ideas of why he's maybe not quite as bad as the Premier thinks. All right. Oh, I could go on and on about myself, sir. I could gloat that I am not just any murderer, but one who killed his own employer, who is a kind of second father, and also contributed to the probable death of all his family members. A virtual mass murderer. These are all good quotes, these ones. A virtual mass murderer is a great quote. And the probable death of all his family members, kind of second father. They're all quotable quotes. But I don't want to go on and on about myself. You should hear some of these Bangalore entrepreneurs. My startup has got this contract with American Express. My startup runs the software in this hospital in London. Blah, blah. I hate that whole fucking Bangalore attitude, I tell you. Maybe it's that connection between the two different, trying to draw that connection between the two entrepreneurial activities that, thinking about it, it's kind of an odd beginning to the chapter. He's making light of what he's done. So find out what a startup company is and explain its key features in a few sentences. That's the next question. Does anyone actually know what a startup company is? We should Google. And that's all I did too, because I've never studied business. I just Googled it. And yeah, it's a company that's new. Somebody's got a great idea. They usually fairly limited funds involved, and they set it up and, you know, hopefully make a lot of money out of it. And I've asked you to Google Bangalore startup companies and spend 10 minutes exploring what you find. Write a few sentences about startup companies in Bangalore. Have a little look. That's all I did when I read the book. I'm like, oh, what's a startup? What's startup companies in Bangalore? What's all that about? So I just Googled it and had a quick squiz, so I knew a bit more about. I had a bit of a better picture in my head of what he's talking about. All right, and the one after that is, how does Bowram describe Mr. Ashok physically? But if you absolutely must find out more about me, just log on to my website, www.whitetigertechnologydrivers.com. More evidence that he doesn't intend to send these letters. Because if he's got his web address there, he's just basically saying, here I am, come and arrest me and lock me up for the rest of my life. All right, that's the URL of my startup. So I'm sick of talking about myself, sir. Tonight I want to talk about the other important man in my story, my ex. Mr. Ashok's face reappears now in my mind's eye as it used to every day when I was in his service, reflected in my rear view mirror. It was such a handsome face that sometimes I couldn't take my eyes off it. Picture a 6-foot-tall fellow, broad-shouldered, with a landlord's powerful, punishing forearms, yet always gentle, almost always, except for that time he punched Pinky Madam in the face, and kind to those around him, even his servants and drivers. All right, there's your description. What do you note about his description of Ashok? It's favourable. What else? What's a little bit unusual about that description? Apart from punching his wife in the face, you know, we overlook that little minor detail. And it's interesting that he is able to overlook that little minor detail. For him, it is a minor detail. What else? There is something else that's slightly... What does he call Mr. Ashok? What's your ex, usually? Yeah, and don't you think... Let's have a look. A handsome face, I couldn't take my eyes off it. Tall, broad shoulders, punishing forearms, yet always gentle. It sounds a bit like he's in love with him. It's got this kind of ring of almost like your Mills and Boon hero, doesn't it? Strong yet gentle. Now, I'm alerting you now as you're reading on, there are a number of references where Bowram kind of flirts with the idea of a homoerotic attraction to Mr. Ashok. I don't think that we should interpret this as Bowram saying he's gay. He's not. I don't think he is gay, but I don't know why Adiga's put that in this novel. But it is definitely there. There's 3 or 4 instances where there is this kind of homoerotic energy in the interaction between the two of them, and it could be that it's just trendy to have gay stuff in novels these days, and so Adiga's put some in, and it's interesting and a bit titillating to the reader. It also, I think, the relationship between Bowram and Ashok is a really complex and interesting one, and that's just another element of this confusing, somewhat complex relationship between these two guys. He does like this guy quite a lot, and he wants to be closer to him, and as the novel goes on, just before he ends up killing him, Ashok really disappoints him. Just as he believes they're becoming closer, Ashok actually lets him down really badly. And it's a little bit like that kind of love-hate relationship when people break up and that sort of stuff. They can react explosively, I suppose. So there is that. Look out for it. It's quite interesting. There, question 7. There is a homoerotic tone to the ways Bowram describes his relationship with his master. Find 2 quotes that suggest this. So, my ex, I thought, was one of them. And... I don't know, handsome face, I couldn't take my eyes off it. And also look out for the rearview mirror, because it's an interesting little symbol, this idea that he sees, imagine him sitting in his car and he's actually watching what the rich are doing in the mirror. They sit in the back seat and he listens to what they're talking about and he watches them in the mirror. So he sees the rich, but it's reflected through a mirror. Just an interesting kind of idea. Now another face appears to the side of his, in memory's mirror. Pinky Madam, his wife, every bit as good-looking as her husband, just as the image of the goddess in the Birla Hindu temple in New Delhi is as fair as the god to whom she is married. She would sit in the back and the 2 of them would talk, and I would drive them wherever they wanted, as faithfully as the servant god Hanuman carried about his master and mistress Ram and Sita. Thinking of Mr. Ashok is making me sentimental. I hope I've got some paper napkins here somewhere. Here's a strange fact. Murder a man, and you feel responsible for his life, possessive even. You know more about him than his father and mother. They knew his fetus, but you knew his corpse. Only you can complete the story of his life. Only you know why his body has to be pushed into the fire before its time, and why his toes curl up and fight for another hour on earth. Now, even though I killed him, you won't find me saying one bad thing about him. I protected his good name when I was his servant, and now that I am, in a sense, his master, I won't stop protecting his good name. I owe him so much. He and Pinky Madam would sit in the back of the car, chatting about life, about India, about America, mixing Hindi and English together, and by eavesdropping on them, I learned a lot about life, India and America, and a fair bit of English too. Perhaps a bit more than I've let on so far. Many of my best ideas are, in fact, borrowed from my ex-employer or his brother or someone else whom I was driving about. I confess, Mr. Premier, I am not an original thinker, but I am an original listener. Yeah, it's a good quote, that one. That whole thing is that many of my best ideas are in fact borrowed from my ex-employer or his brother or someone else who I was driving about. What kind of best ideas might he be thinking of? Killing him, yeah. So remember how he sees the murder as an act of entrepreneurship. So he's saying that his idea of actually committing a crime and stealing the money to get ahead, he's kind of learned that idea a little bit actually from watching how the rich operate, their ruthless behaviour. That's what he's getting at there, I think. And I'm suggesting, what I think he means by that is that he's learned to be that you need to be ruthless to get ahead by listening to how his employers operate. And we'll get to hear more about how they operate as the novel goes on. True. Eventually, Mr. Ashok and I had a disagreement or two about an English term, income tax, and things began to sour between us. But that messy stuff comes later in the story. Right now, we're still on the best of terms. We've just met, far from Delhi, in the city called Dhanbad. I came to Dhanbad after my father's death. What's his father's name? Thank you. Well done. He had been ill for some time, but there is no hospital in Laxmanga, although there are 3 different foundation stones for a hospital laid by 3 different politicians before 3 different elections. That little piece of evidence there, what is that suggesting? There's no hospital in Laxmanga, all right, but there are 3 different foundation stones for a hospital laid by 3 different politicians before 3 different elections. Read that for me. What could that be suggesting? Yeah, they promised to build hospitals, but they didn't. You know, when you see a big building and they often have a foundation stone, it's often engraved. You know, this foundation stone was put in here by blah, blah politician on blah, blah day. That's really common, and that means that after that they build the rest of the building around that foundation stone. So in Laxmanga there are 3 different foundation stones but no hospital before 3 elections. So they're promising things before elections in order to kind of make themselves look good and not delivering on their promise. And if you go into Melbourne, say go to the town hall or something like that, look for somewhere around the bottom of it, there'll be a stone and it'll be called a foundation stone. It's not as common to have them now as it used to be, but usually they're laid by somebody important who's helped provide the funds for a public. So there's 3 different stones. When he began spitting blood that morning, Kishan, who's Kishan? His older brother, that's right. Kishan and I took him by boat across the river. We kept washing his mouth with water from the river, but the water was so polluted that it made him spit more blood. There was a rickshaw puller on the other side of the river who recognised my father. He took the 3 of us for free to the government hospital. There were 3 black goats sitting on the steps to the large, faded white building. The stench of goat faeces wafted out from the open door. The glass in most of the windows was broken. A cat was staring out at us from one cracked window. A sign on the gate said, Lohia Universal Free Hospital, proudly inaugurated by the great socialist, a holy proof that he keeps his promise. So remember, the great socialist is the big politician, the big successful politician in the area, the highest politician that Balram comes across. What image have we got of that hospital just from the start there? Stinking animal feces, broken windows, stench. It's free. It's a free hospital. Kishan and I carried our father in, stamping on the goat turds which had spread like a constellation of black stars on the ground. There was no doctor at the hospital. What kind of hospital has no doctor? Surely if you're going to find a doctor anywhere, it's going to be in a hospital. The ward boy, after we bribed him 10 rupees, said that a doctor might come in the evening. Again, this is this idea of corruption. That you go to the hospital and in order to find a doctor, you have to bribe somebody in the hospital to give you information. Yeah? All examples. I would almost make myself a little collection of examples of corruption so that you can, if you need to discuss corruption, you can work your little way through them. The doors of the hospital's rooms were wide open. The beds had metal springs sticking out of them. And the cat began snarling at us the moment we stepped into the room. It's not safe in the rooms. That cat has tasted blood. All right, I think this is a joke. At least I hope it is. The idea that, well, you know when an animal's tasted blood, so maybe the sick people who are too sick to defend themselves are being eaten by the animals. Do I think this is really happening, or is that a joke? I'm not really sure. But are they poking fun at the idea? I'm not sure whether they're seriously suggesting the cats are having a nibble on the patients or... Okay, the cat has tasted blood. A couple of Muslim men had spread a newspaper on the ground and were sitting on it. One of them had an open wound on his leg, and Kishan and I lowered father onto the newspaper sheets and we waited there. Two little girls came and sat down behind us. Both of them had yellow eyes. Jaundice. She gave it to me. I did not. You gave it to me. And now we'll both die. Jaundice is an illness. Usually there's something's wrong with your liver. Usually skin goes yellow and your eyes go yellow. Babies are often born with jaundice, which is quite normal. My daughter was born with jaundice, and they recover, but it is related to the liver not quite working as well as it needs to. It's more of a symptom of a problem with your liver, some of which are serious and others. The liver's a pretty tough organ. It can usually fix itself up. I think that comment, and now we'll both die, is interesting because it sort of suggests that idea that people are aware that their lives can quite easily be over when they become sick. And you find that if you read stuff from, a century ago when people died young, people were much more familiar with the idea that they could get sick and die and die young. Yeah, like when you read, say, Wuthering Heights and those sort of novels 200 years ago where people got TB and dropped off at 25, it was much more normal and common. Okay, keeping on going. An old man with a cotton patch on one eye came and sat down behind the girls. The Muslim man kept adding newspapers to the ground, and the line of diseased eyes, raw wounds, delirious mouths kept growing. So delirious, when I was 9, I got pneumonia and I was found wandering around the house in a delirious state. It means that you've lost control. You don't know where you are. A person who's delirious doesn't know where they are or what they're doing. A bit off the planet. So that would be it. That would be a good quote. The diseased eyes, raw wounds and delirious mouths. Why isn't there a doctor here, Uncle? I asked. This is the only hospital on either side of the river. I don't think he means uncle as in it's really his uncle. I think he's just being respectful there. So it's the only hospital on either side of the river. See, it's like this, the older Muslim man said. There's a government medical superintendent who's meant to check that doctors visit village hospitals like this. Now, each time this post falls vacant, the great socialist lets all the big doctors know that he's having an open auction for that post. The going rate for this post is around 400,000 rupees these days. That much? I said, my mouth opened wide. Why not? There's good money in public service. Now imagine that I'm a doctor. I beg and borrow the money and give it to the great socialist while touching his feet. He gives me the job. I take an oath to God and the Constitution of India, and then I put my boots up on my desk in the state capital. He raised his feet onto an imaginary table. Next I call all the junior government doctors who I'm supposed to supervise into my office. So next I call all the junior government doctors who I'm supposed to supervise into my office. I take out my big government ledger. I shout out, Dr. Rampandi. He pointed a finger at me. I assumed my role in the play. I saluted him. Yes, sir. He held out his palm to me. You know what I mean? They're play acting. Imagine all these guys sitting around on the floor talking about the corruption of the doctors and the politicians and all that sort of stuff. And they're acting out their little roles in this thing. So when he says he puts his palm out, he's putting his hand out to receive money. So he held his palm out to me. Now you, Dr. Rampandi, will kindly put 1/3 of your salary in my palm. Good boy. In return, I do this. He made a tick on the imaginary ledger. You can keep the rest of your government salary and go work in some private hospital for the rest of the week. Forget the village, because according to this ledger, you've been there. You've treated my wounded leg. You've healed that girl's jaundice. Ah, the patient said. Even the ward boys who had gathered around to listen nodded their heads in appreciation. Stories of rottenness and corruption are always the best stories, aren't they? Now, that's a really great quote. Can we just talk about that for a second? Did you follow what's going on? The great socialist, he runs, he gets to appoint the head doctor. So when he goes to appoint that person, all the doctors who want that position, they kind of bid for it. This is all off the books, unofficially. And he usually sells that position to the person who gives him the most money. And then that person collects 1/3 of the salaries of all of the doctors who are employed by the government, right? And in return, they give him 1/3. In return, he ticks off that they are actually doing their job in the state. Right, imagine the government pays them $100,000 a year to work in the government hospitals. They are getting paid. Somebody who's corrupt is taking $33,000 off each of them, and for that payment, they're ticking off that they're actually doing their job properly. And while they're not at work for the government, they're actually off in some private hospital earning another salary as well. So for your little files on corruption that you guys are putting together, here is another example of pretty full-on corruption. It's also really similar to that discussion of the school teacher, that everyone knows it's happening. They don't do anything about it, and they don't even seem that upset about it. It just seems to be a part of the way things operate. And in fact, they're all sitting around play acting it and talking about stories of rottenness and corruption being good stories. So if you are wealthy, you would not be going to this hospital. You go to a nice hospital, and they're quite good, and you pay to use them. And in fact, people go from Australia to many countries around the world to get surgeries done. They might get plastic surgery. There's a lot of stuff on babies, you know, the making of babies through with very IVF stuff gets done. Teeth done, yep, no guarantee. But the dental and medical treatment is pretty good. It's pretty good. So a lot of people are prepared to take the risk. All right, moving on. The question 12, stories of rottenness and corruption are always the best stories, aren't they? Discuss how his father's death is an example of the corruption in India. What is significant about the scene where the lack of a doctor is explained to an audience? So you can discuss not just what they say, these people sitting around on the newspaper, but the fact that they are not seemingly outraged by it. It's accepted as part of the way the system works. When Kishan put some, back on page 50, when Kishan put some food into father's mouth, he spat it out with blood. His lean black body began to convulse, spewing blood this way and that. The girls with the yellow eyes began to wail. The other patients moved away from my father. He's got tuberculosis, hasn't he? The older Muslim man asked, as he swatted the flies away from the wound in his leg. Tuberculosis. Right, that's question 13. But Bahram's father dies of tuberculosis. Research what tuberculosis is and use the quote, "Oh, it's TB, I've seen it before," in rickshaw pullers. They get weak from their work, to connect up the issue of poverty, social stigma and tuberculosis in an informed response. You should write 3 to 5 sentences. Now, when you Google this, this is what you will find. Tuberculosis is a disease of the lungs, and people, it's very, very common disease. It used to be what people died of prior to, say, 19th, 18th, 17th centuries. Like all the Brontes and that, they all died of it. And lots of young people died of it. They'd get this sort of, it used to be called consumption, and that their lungs, they get like bleeding in their lungs, so they cough blood up. It is contagious, but I've had the injection twice, because when I was a kid, my grandfather got tuberculosis, so I got it as a baby, and then it used to be commonplace for people to be given it as teenagers as well, so I had a second one as a teenager. They don't give it out these days because it's very uncommon for people to get it. It's regarded now as a disease of poverty. People tend to get it when they are very run down and under, malnourished, and in fact it's easily treatable with medication and so forth. So people who do get it, if they are properly treated, they get better. Yeah, and the fact that his father is a rickshaw puller, which is at the lowest part of society, his immune system is weakened by a lack of food and hard work, and then he's become sick and he's not been treated. So the fact that he has TB is actually to do with him being poor. It's not just that it's around. It is around. It's everywhere in the world. Apart from places like Australia, we don't have a lot. I think it's coughing. I think you get it from. But do Google it, because you're just getting Doctor's description of it, and really, I'm not an expert. Took me about 2 seconds to read about it. We don't know, sir. He's been coughing for a while, but we didn't know what it was. Oh, it's TB. I've seen it before in rickshaw pullers. They get weak from their work. Well, maybe the doctor will turn up in the evening. He did not. Around 6 o'clock that day, as the government ledger no doubt accurately reported, my father was permanently cured of his tuberculosis. So this is thick sarcasm. The permanent cure of tuberculosis involved what? Yeah, he was permanently cured by dying. The ward boys made us clean up after father before we could remove the body. They have to clean up the mess before they're allowed to take the body. So the ward boys are kind of holding them captive, clean up, or you can't take the body away. Pretty messed up. A goat came in and sniffed as we were mopping the blood off the floor. The ward boys petted her and fed her a plump carrot as we mopped our father's infected blood off the floor. So pretty horrible death. Kishan's marriage took place a month after the cremation. It was one of the good marriages. We had the boy and we screwed the girl's family hard. That was a good quote, that one. They screwed the girl's family. I remember exactly what we got in dowry from the girl's side, and thinking about it even now makes my mouth fill up with water. 5,000 rupees cash, all crisp, new, unsoiled notes fresh from the bank, plus a hero bicycle, plus a thick gold necklace for Kishan. After the wedding, Granny Kusum, or Kusum Granny, took the 5,000 rupees and the hero cycle and the thick gold necklace. Kishan got 2 weeks to dip his beak into his wife, and then he was packed off to Danbad. My cousin Dilip and I came along with him. We three found work in a tea shop in Danbad. The owner had heard good things about Kishan's work in the tea shop at Laxmanga. So, let's decode that. What's Granny done? Yeah, she basically sold Kishan off. She got him married, collected the loot. All Kishan... Yeah, what does Kishan get out of this little arrangement?
2 weeks.
2 weeks of... Yeah, 2 weeks of sex with his wife, and then he's off to work. He's sent away. He doesn't even get to keep having sex with his wife. He's sent off to work in the next town. All right, so this is that. If you're going to be writing about the family and the way that they're willing to kind of exploit each other, this is quite a good example, concrete example of that. Also, it's a good marriage. So this idea of the boy is worth more because you collect the dowry from the girl's family. So 15, what is a dowry? Google it and write a description of its legal status and the violence associated with it. In particular, look up bride burning. I'll leave that with you guys to look up on your own. I won't tell you about it. But it's quite hideous and quite interesting. 16, when they screwed the girl's family hard, what did they get for a dowry? Use a currency converter to work out what the amount in rupees is equivalent to. It's not going to be much, I wouldn't think. 5,000 rupees, not worth a lot. $97? Yeah, about $100. Kishan was sold for about $100. 18, how does Balram describe the men who work in the tea shops? What is your fate if you do your job well with honesty, dedication, and sincerity? We'll move on to the tea shops now. Page 51, luckily for us, he hadn't heard anything about me. All right, this is a description of the tea shop at Danbad. Go to a tea shop anywhere along the Ganga, sir, and look at the men working in that tea shop. Men, I say, but better call them human spiders that go crawling in between and under the tables with rags in their hand. Crushed humans in crushed uniforms, sluggish, unshaven, in their 30s or 40s or 50s, but still boys. But that is your fate if you do your job well, with honesty, dedication, and sincerity, the way Gandhi would have done it, no doubt. Okay, total classic quotes here. We've got human spiders. These people in the cafes, they're crawling around, cleaning. They're just like animals. They're crushed humans in crushed uniforms, sluggish, unshaven, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, but never men, still boys. And that's your fate if you do what you're told, if you do your job well, with honesty, dedication, and sincerity. If you do what you're meant to do, you will end up like these people, crushed, a boy your whole life, a human spider. Bowram, on the other hand, let's go into the next sentence. I did my job with near total dishonesty, lack of dedication, and insincerity. And so the tea shop was a profoundly enriching experience. So Bowram, he's contrasting himself to these men who never get anywhere. Okay, how does he describe his attitude to work? He's dishonest, he's insincere, and he's not dedicated. What does he get out of his work? We're about to go on to that. And what happens as a result of his attitude? All right, let's keep going. Page 52. Instead of wiping out spots from tables and crushing coals for the oven, I used my time at the tea shop in Laxmanga to spy on every customer at every table and overhear everything they said. I decided that this is how I would keep my education going forward. That's the one good thing I'll say for myself. I've always been a big believer in education, especially my own. He's just learning from what people say. He's just learning everything. You know, he's listening and learning from what people talk about. The owner of the shop sat up the front, below the big photo of Gandhi, stirring a slow-boiling broth of sugar syrup. He knew what I was up to. Whenever he saw me loafing around a table or pretending to be doing a spot of wiping just so I could hear more of a conversation, he would shout, "You thug!" then jump down from his seat, chase me around the tea shop with the ladle he used to stir the sugar, and whack me on the head with it. The burning syrup singed me whenever the ladle touched and left a series of spots on my ears, which people sometimes mistake for vitiligo or another skin disease, a network of pink by which you can still identify me, although the police predictably missed it. So he's physically scarred by his employer hitting him with a hot ladle. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Physically scarred. Eventually I got sent home. No one else in Laxmanga would hire me after that, even as a field hand. So it was mostly for my sake that Kishan and Dilip had come to Danbad, to give me a chance to start my career as a human spider afresh. That's right, I got a bit confused here. That's the description of him in Laxmanga, where he's been eavesdropping and annoying his boss. Couldn't get work after he got fired from there, and that's why Kishan's going to take him somewhere else. In his journey from village to village, from Laxmanga to Delhi, the entrepreneur's path crosses any number of provincial towns that have the pollution and noise and traffic of a big city, without any hint of the true city's sense of history, planning and grandeur. Half-baked cities built for half-baked men. There was money in the air in Danbad. I saw buildings with sides made entirely of glass and men with gold in their teeth. And all this glass and gold, all of it came from the coal pits. Outside the town there was coal, more coal than you would find anywhere else in the darkness, maybe more coal than anywhere else in the world. Miners came to eat at my tea shop. I always gave them the best service because they had the best tales to tell. They said that the coal mines went on for miles and miles outside the town. In some places there were fires burning under the earth and sending smoke into the air, fires that had been burning continuously for 100 years. And it was at the tea shop in this city, built by coal, while wiping a table and lingering to overhear a conversation, that my life changed. You know, sometimes I think I did the wrong thing in life becoming a miner. These are people talking now. Then, what else can people like you and me become? Politicians? Everyone's getting a better car these days, and you know how much they pay their drivers. 1,700 rupees a month. I dropped my rag. I ran to Kishan, who was cleaning out the insides of an oven. After my father's death, it was Kishan who took care of me. I don't attempt to hide his role in making me who I am today, but he had no entrepreneurial spunk at all. He would have been happy to let me sink in the mud. Nothing doing, Kishan said. Granny said stick to the tea shop, and we'll stick to the tea shop. I went to all the taxi stands. Down on my knees I begged random strangers, but no one would agree to teach me car driving for free. It was going to cost me 300 rupees to learn how to drive a car. 300 rupees? Today in Bangalore I can't get enough people for my business. People come and people go. Good men never stay. I'm even thinking of advertising in the newspaper. Bangalore-based businessman seeks smart men for his business. Apply at once. Attractive remuneration packages on offer, lessons in life and entrepreneurship included for free. Go to any pub or bar in Bangalore with your ears open, and it's the same thing you hear. Can't get enough call centre workers, can't get enough software engineers, can't get enough sales managers. There are 25 pages of job advertisements in the newspaper every week. Things are different in the darkness. There, every morning, tens of thousands of young men sit in the tea shops reading the newspaper, or lie on a charpoy humming a tune, or sit in their rooms talking to a photo of a film actress. They have no job to do today. They know they won't get any job today. They've given up the fight. They're the smart ones. The stupid ones have gathered down in a field in the centre of the town. Every now and then a truck comes by, and all the men in the field rush to it with their hands outstretched, shouting, "Take me, take me!" Everyone pushed me, I pushed back, but the truck scooped up only 6 or 7 men and left the rest behind. They were off on some construction or digging job, the lucky bastards. Another half hour of waiting, another truck came, another scramble, another fight. After the 5th or 6th fight of the day, I finally found myself at the head of the crowd, face to face with the truck driver. He was a Sikh man with a big blue turban. In one hand he held a wooden stick, and he swung the stick to drive back the crowd. "Everyone," he said, "take off your shirts. I've got to see a man's nipples before I'll give him a job." He looked at my chest, he squeezed the nipple, slapped my butt, glared into my eyes, and then poked the stick against my thigh. "Too thin, fuck off." "Give me a chance, sir. My body is small, but there's a lot of fight in it. I'll dig for you. I'll haul cement for you. He swung his stick. It hit me on the left ear. I fell down, and others rushed to take my place. I sat on the ground, rubbed my ear, and watched the truck leave in a big cloud of dust. The shadow of an eagle passed over my body. I burst into tears. "White tiger, there you are!" Kishan and cousin Dilip lifted me up off the ground, big smiles on their faces. "Great news! Granny has agreed to let them invest in my driving classes." "There's only one thing," Kishan said. "Granny says you're a greedy pig. She wants you to swear by all the gods in heaven that you won't forget her once you get rich." "I swear." "Pinch your neck and swear you'll send every rupee you make every month back to Granny." All right, we'll just talk a little bit about what I've read, which is quite a lot. So first of all, Kishan. All right, Kishan, he has no entrepreneurial spunk. He's prepared. I ran out of time, have I? He's prepared to. He's never going to push his way out of this. He's got no spunk. He's got no drive. He'll just sit there. So that's a good quote for Kishan, no entrepreneurial spunk. And he's also not going to help Balram either. He's happy to let Balram sink into the mud. That's there as well. All right. So one of the questions here asks you to contrast employment opportunities in Bangalore and the light with employment opportunities in the darkness. And clearly he's saying that there's heaps of jobs in the light. You know, employers are scrambling to get people to fill these positions. In the darkness, the smart ones have already given up looking for work. The ones who are dumb, they put themselves out there for hours and hours and hours a day. I mean, we read the description of these men. They line up hoping someone will come and employ them for a few hours. It's just this crazy fight. And so he's saying that the opportunities there are terrible. But then Kusum agrees to let him train as a driver. What does he have to do? Yeah, give all his money every month has to go to Granny if she lets him train as a driver.
I'm continuing my reading without my students. We went into the house where the taxi drivers lived. An old man in a brown uniform, which was like an ancient army outfit, was smoking a hookah that was warmed up by a bowl of live coals. Kishan explained the situation to him. The old driver asked, "What caste are you?" "Halwai." "Sweet makers," the old driver said, shaking his head. "That's what you people do. You make sweets. How can you learn to drive?" He pointed his hookah at the live coals. "That's like getting coals to make ice for you. Mastering a car." He moved the stick with an invisible gearbox. "It's like taming a wild stallion. Only a boy from the warrior castes can manage that. You need to have aggression in your blood. Muslims, Rajputs, Sikhs, they're fighters. They can become drivers. You think sweet makers can last long in fourth gear? Coal was taught to make ice starting the next morning at 6. So, a good quote there. 300 rupees plus a bonus will do that. We practiced in a taxi. Each time I made a mistake with the gears, he slapped me on the skull. Why don't you stick to sweets and tea? For every hour I spent in the car, he made me spend 200 or 300. I was made a free repair mechanic for all the taxis in the stand. Late every evening I emerged from under a taxi like a hog from sewage, my face black with grease, my hands shiny with engine oil. I dipped into a ganga of black and came out a driver. Listen, the old driver said when I was handing him over 100 rupees he had been promised as a bonus. It's not enough to drive. You've got to become a driver. You've got to get the right attitude, understand? Anyone tries to overtake you on the road, you do this. He clenched his fist and shook it. And call them a sister fucker a few times. The road is a jungle, get it? A good driver must roar to get ahead on it. So the road is a jungle. Like everything else in this place, if you want to get ahead, you've got to fight. He patted me on the back. You're better than I thought. You are a surprise package, little fellow. I've got a reward for you. You're better than I thought. You are a surprise package, little fellow. But I've got a reward for you. He walked. I followed. It was evening. We went through dim streets and markets. We walked for half an hour while everything around us grew dark. And then it was as if we had stepped into fireworks. The street was full of coloured doors and coloured windows, and in each door and each window a woman was looking out at me with a big smile. Ribbons of red paper and silver foil glittered between the rooftops of the street. Tea was being boiled in stalls by the sides of the road. 4 men rushed at us at once. The old driver explained that they should keep away since it was my first time. Let him enjoy the sights first. That's the best part of this game, isn't it? The looking. Sure, the men said and stepped back. That's what we want him to do. Enjoy. I walked with the old driver, my mouth open, gaping at all the gorgeous women jeering and taunting me from behind their grilled windows, all of them begging me to dip my beak into them. The old driver explained the nature of the wares on offer. Up in one building, sitting in a windowsill in such a way as we could see the full spread of their gleaming dark legs, with the Americans, girls in short skirts and high platform shoes carrying pink handbags with names in English written on them in sequins. The old driver explained the nature of the wares on offer. This word wares is important because it's sex and sexuality in this novel is presented as a consumable, I suppose, something that is bought and sold, just as these women are bought and sold. Up in one building, sitting on a windowsill in such a way as we could see the full spread of their gleaming dark legs, were the Americans, girls in short skirts and high platform shoes carrying pink handbags with names in English written on them in sequins. They were slim and athletic for men who liked the Western kind. In this corner, sitting in the threshold of an open house, the traditionals, fat, chunky types in saris for those who like value for their money. There were the eunuchs in one window, teenagers in the next window. The face of a small boy appeared from between a woman's legs and then vanished. A blinding flash of light, a blue door opened, and 4 light-skinned Nepali women in gorgeous red petticoats looked out. "Them!" I shouted. Them! "Good," the driver said. "I like that too. I always go for the foreign ones." We went in and he picked a woman from the 4 and I picked another woman. And we went in and he picked a woman from the 4 and I picked another woman. And we went into 2 rooms and the woman I picked closed the door behind me. My first time. Half an hour later, when the old driver and I staggered back drunk and happy to his house, I put coals in his hookah. I brought him the hookah and watched as he took a deep, contented suck on the pipe. Smoke came out his nostrils. "What is it now? I've taught you to be a driver and a man. What more do you want?" "Sir, can you ask the taxi men if they need someone? I'll work for free at first. I need a job." "What is it now? I've taught you to be a driver and a man. What more do you want?" "Sir, can't you ask the taxi men if they need someone? I'll work for free at first. I need a job." The old driver laughed. "I haven't had to work in 40 years, you nitwit. How the fuck can I help you? Now get lost." I haven't had work in... The old driver laughed. "I haven't had work in 40 years, you nitwit. How the fuck can I help you? Now get lost." So next morning I was walking from house to house, knocking on gates and front doors of the rich, asking if anyone wanted a driver, a good driver, an experienced driver for their car. Everyone said no, you didn't get a job that way. You had to know someone in the family to get a job, not by knocking on the gate and asking. There's no reward for entrepreneurship in most of India, Your Excellency. It's a sad fact. Every evening I came home tired and close to tears, but Kishan said, "Keep trying, someone will say yes in the end." So I went looking from house to house, house to house, house to house. Finally, after 2 weeks of asking and being told to get lost, I got to a house with 10-foot-high walls and a cage of iron grills around each window. A sly, slant-eyed Nepali with a white moustache peered at me through the bars of the gate. "What do you want?" I didn't like the way he had asked me one bit. I put a big smile on my face. "Any need of a driver, sir? I've got 4 years' experience. My master recently died, so I..." "Fuck off! We have a driver already," the Nepali said. He twirled a big bunch of keys and grinned. My heart sank and I was about to turn away when I saw a figure on the terrace, a fellow in long, loose white clothes, walking around and around, lost deep in thought. "I swear by God, sir, I swear by all 36,000,004 of them, the moment I saw his face I knew, this is the master for me." It's more of that sort of, this is a reference to Ashok here, but more of that kind of him being the man for Balram. Some dark fate had tied his lifeline to mine, because at that very moment he looked down. I knew he was coming down to save me. So we talk about Ashok as having saved Balram. I just had to divert this Nepali fucker as long as possible. "I'm a good driver, sir. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't steal." "Fuck off, don't you understand? I don't disrespect God, I don't disrespect my family. What's wrong with you? Get lost at once. I don't gossip about my masters, I don't steal, I don't blaspheme." Just then the door of the house opened, but it was not the man on the terrace. It was an older man with a big white moustache that was thick and curved and pointy at the tips. "What's going on, Ram Bahadur?" he asked the Nepali. "He's begging, sir, begging for money." I banged on the gate. "I'm from your village, sir. I'm from Laxmanga, the village near the Black Fort. Your village." The old man was the Stork. He glared at me. Now, this is the Stork's house, that high-walled mansion. He glared at me for the longest time, and then he told the Nepali guard, "Let the boy in." Swoosh! As the gate was open, I dived straight at the Stork's feet. No Olympic runner could have gone in as fast as I did through those gates. The Nepali had no chance at all of blocking me. You should have seen me that day. What a performance of wails and kisses and tears. You could use that, wails, and he needs to use wails and kisses and tears to get a job. You'd think I'd been born into a caste of performing actors. And all the time while clutching the Stork's feet, I was staring at his huge, dirty, uncut toenails and thinking, what is he doing in Dhanbad? Why isn't he back home screwing poor fishermen of their money and humping their daughters? That's a quote. What does the Stork normally do in Laxmanga? That. "Get up, boy," he said. Big uncut toenails scratched my cheeks. Mr. Ashok, the man on the terrace, of course, was by his side now. "You're really from Laxmanga?" "Yes, sir. I used to work in the tea shop, the one with the big photo of Gandhi in it. I used to break coals there. You came in once to have tea." "Ah, the old village." He closed his eyes. "Do people there still remember me? It's been 3 years since I was there." "Of course, sir. People say, our father is gone. Thakur Ramdev is gone. The best of the landlords is gone. Who will protect us now?" So this major sucking up that's going on here, isn't it? The Stork enjoyed hearing that. He turned to Mr. Ashok. "Let's see how good he is. Call Mukesh too. Let's go for a spin." Only later did I understand how lucky I'd been. Mr. Ashok had come back from America just the previous day. A car had been bought for him. A driver was needed for the car, and on that day I had turned up. Now there were 2 cars in the garage. One was your standard Maruti Suzuki, that little white car you see all over India, and the other was the Honda City. Now the Maruti is a small, simple fellow, a perfect servant to the driver. The moment you turn the ignition key, he does exactly what the driver wants him to do. The Honda City is a larger car, a more sophisticated creature with a mind of his own. He has power steering and an advanced engine, and he does what he wants to. Given that I was so nervous then, if the Stork had told me to take the driving test in the Honda City, that would have been the end of me, sir, but luck was on my side. They make me drive the Maruti Suzuki. The Stork and Mr. Ashok got into the back. A small, dark man, Mukesh, sir, the Stork's other son, got into the front seat and gave me orders. The Nepali guard watched with a darkened face as I took the car out of the gates and into the city of Dhanbad. They made me drive them around for half an hour and then told me to head back. "Not bad," the old man said as he got out of the car. "Fellow was cautious and good. What's your last name again?" "Halwai. Halwai." He turned to the small dark man. "What caste is that, top or bottom?" And I knew that my future depended on the answer to this question. I should explain a thing or two about caste. Even Indians get confused about this word, especially educated Indians in the cities. They'll make a mess of explaining it to you, but it's simple really. Let's start with me. See, Halwai, my name, means sweet maker. That's my caste, my destiny. Everyone in the darkness who hears that name knows all about me at once. That's why Kishan and I kept getting jobs at sweet shops wherever we went. The owner thought, they're Halwais, making sweets and tea is in their blood. But if we were Halwais, then why was my father not making sweets but pulling a rickshaw? His father is not making sweets but pulling a rickshaw. Why did I grow up breaking coals and wiping tables instead of eating gulab jamuns and sweet pastries where and when I chose to? Why was I lean and dark and cunning? Nice description of himself, eh? And not fat and creamy-skinned and smiling like a boy raised on sweets would be. See, this country, in its days of greatness, when it was the richest nation on earth, was like a zoo. A clean, well-kept, orderly zoo. Everyone in his place, everyone happy. So this is the old days in India. Goldsmiths here, cowherds there, landlords there. The man called a halwai made sweets. The man called a cowherd tended cows. The untouchable cleaned feces. Landlords were kind to their serfs. Women covered their heads with a veil and turned their eyes to the ground when talking to strange men. And then, thanks to all those politicians in Delhi, on the 15th of August 1947, the day the British left, the cages had been let open. All right, the cages had been let open, and the animals had attacked and ripped each other apart, and jungle law replaced zoo law. Those that were the most ferocious and hungriest had eaten everyone up and grown big bellies. Oh, this is really important stuff. I will explain in a second. If I can get my highlighter to work, go away. Oh, goodness me. Oh, why is this not working? Delete. All right, those that were the most ferocious and the most hungry, those that were the most ferocious, the hungriest, had eaten everyone else up and had grown big bellies. That was all that counted now, the size of your belly. All right. It didn't matter whether you were a woman or a Muslim or an untouchable. Anyone with a belly could rise up. Anyone with a belly could rise up. My father's father must have been a real halwai, a sweet maker, but when he inherited the shop, a member of some other caste must have stolen it from him with the help of the police. My father had not had the belly to fight back. That's why he had fallen all the way into the mud, to the level of the rickshaw puller. That's why I was cheated of my destiny to be fat and creamy-skinned and smiling. To sum up, in the old days, there were 1,000 castes in destiny in India. Beautiful. These days, there are just 2 castes, men with big bellies and men with small bellies, and only 2 destinies, eat and get eaten up. Now, this is so important. I have read many essays where people talk about Balram's problem, in India. I've read many essays where people talk about Balram's problem in India as being the caste system and his place within the caste system. This is a completely wrong interpretation of what Adiga and Balram in this section is saying. What he is talking about is actually the collapse of the caste system. The fact that when the British left India, and it caused the existing social structure, which was organised around people being born into particular occupations. Obviously, it was a hierarchical system, and no doubt, very unfair to those at the bottom of the caste system versus those at the top. No doubt, it had its faults, but what the narrator is saying here is that the collapse of that system led to a kind of a dog-eat-dog situation where, the strongest survived, the most ferocious, the hungriest. They ate everybody up, and they had grown big bellies. And then the big bellies is that eating up the bellies is wealth. So those who then have wealth, who've grown the big bellies by eating everybody else up, are able to rise up within that society irrespective of which caste they come from. So it doesn't matter what caste you are. You could be female, you could be Muslim, untouchable. Anyone with a belly, anyone with wealth can rise up. So Balram's, and he's saying that, his family's destiny, which was to be sweet makers, there must have been a shop back in the olden days. With the help of the police, somebody has taken his destiny from him. His father hasn't been able to get it back and has fallen to the lowest of the low. And Balram is born into a caste, but he's cheated of that destiny, which was to be fat and creamy-skinned and smiling, meaning that if he had been in a sweet-making family, he would have been much better off. So summing up, he says, there used to be lots of different lives available to people in India through the caste system. There were 1,000 castes and 1,000 destinies. These days there are just 2, men with big bellies and men with small bellies, so the haves and the have-nots. And 2 destinies, eat or get eaten up. So you have to fight and take your share and everybody else's as well. And if you don't do that, somebody will get you. Very important. He's saying it is not the caste system that's causing this, but the collapse of the caste system. Now the dark man, Mukesh, sir, brother of Mr. Ashok, did not know the answer. I told you that people in the cities know nothing much about the caste system, so the stork turned to me and asked me directly, "Are you from the top caste or the bottom caste, boy?" I didn't know what he wanted me to say, so I flipped both answers. I could probably have made a good case either way, and then said, "Bottom, sir." Turning to Mukesh, sir, the old man said, "All our employees are top caste. It won't hurt to have 1 or 2 of the bottom caste working for us." Mukesh, sir, looked at me with narrowed eyes. He didn't know the village ways, but he had all the cunning of the landlords. "Do you drink?" "No, sir. In my caste we never drink." "How why?" Mr. Ashok said with a grin. "Are you a sweet maker? Can you cook for us while you're not driving?" "Certainly, sir. I cook very well. Very tasty sweets. Gulab jamuns, laddus, anything you desire," I said. "I've worked in a tea shop for many years." Mr. Ashok seemed to find this amusing. "Only in India," he said. "Your driver can also make sweets for you. Only in India. Start from tomorrow." "Not so fast," Mukesh said. "First we have to ask about his family. How many are they? Where they live? Everything. And one more thing. How much do you want?" Another test. Absolutely nothing, sir. You're like a father and mother to me, and how can I ask for money from my parents? All right, so this is more examples of how wage labour in this novel is presented as virtual slavery. The idea that people are not even expected to, or they have to kind of pretend that they wouldn't even take money. 800 rupees a month, he said. No, sir, please, it's too much. Give me half of that. It's enough, more than enough. If we keep you beyond 2 months, it'll go to 1,500. Looking suitably devastated, I accepted the money from him. Mukesh, sir, was not yet convinced about me. He looked me up and down and said, "He's young. Don't we want someone older?" The Stork shook his head. "Catch him young and you can keep him for life. A driver in his 40s, you get, 20 years of service, then his eyes fail? This fellow will last 30, 35 years. His teeth are solid. He's got his hair. He's in good shape." So they're virtually describing him like an animal, aren't they? It also reminds me of the revolting representations I've seen in film and television of slavery and the buying and selling of people that has occurred in history. That looking at their teeth and thinking about them working for them for life and so forth, and how long that they're going to last. He sucked on his beetle juice, which was filling up his mouth, turned and spat out a jet of red liquid to the side. Then he told me to come back in 2 days. He must have phoned his man in Laxmanga, and then the man must have gone and spoken to Kusum and asked the neighbours about us and phoned back. He's got a good family. They've never made any trouble. Father died some years ago of TB. He was a rickshaw puller. Brother is in Danbad too, a worker in the tea shops. No history of supporting Naxals or other terrorists. All right. They really check out their background. And they don't move about. We know exactly where they are. That last piece of information was very important. I had to know where my family was at all times. I have not told you yet, have I, about what the buffalo did to his domestic servant, the one who was supposed to guard his infant son, who got kidnapped by the Naxals and then tortured and killed. The servant was one of our caste, sir, a Halwai. I had seen him once or twice when I was a boy. The servant said he had nothing to do with the kidnapping. The buffalo did not believe him and got 4 of his hired gunmen to torture the servant. Then they shot him through the head. Fair enough, I would do the same to someone who let my son get kidnapped. But then, because the buffalo was sure that the man had deliberately let the child be kidnapped for money, he also went after the servant's family. One brother was set upon while working in the fields, beaten to death there. That brother's wife was finished off by 3 men working together. A sister still unmarried was also finished off. Then the house where the family had lived was surrounded by the 4 henchmen and set on fire. Now, who would want this to happen to his family, sir? Which inhuman wretch of a monster would consign his own granny and brother and aunt and nephews and nieces to death? Well, we wonder which one, don't we? The Stork and his sons could count on my loyalty. Right, so of course later on they can't, and he wants and needs to know where his employees are. So, find that bit. We know exactly where they are, so that employers make sure that the servants behave themselves, because the threat is there as to what they'll do to their family. And the Stork and his sons could count on his loyalty. When I came back, the Nepali guard opened the gate without a word. I was inside the compound now. As far as masters go, Mr. Ashok, Mukesh, sir, and the Stork were better than 9 in 10. There was always enough food in the house for the servants. On Sundays you even got a special dish, rice mixed with small red chunks of boneless chicken. I had never had a regular chicken dish in my life until then. It made you feel like a king eating chicken Sunday after Sunday and then licking your fingers. So he's not, this is another indication of the poverty we're talking about. He's never had chicken before. And he feels fantastic eating chicken on a Sunday. So Sunday after Sunday, not even every day. I had a covered room to sleep in. Wow, great. True, I had to share it with the other driver, a grim-looking fellow called Ram Persad. Now, this name is worth remembering, the other driver. And he had the nice big bed while I had to sleep on the floor. Still, a covered room's a covered room, and much nicer than sleeping on the road, as Kishan and I had been doing all the time we were in Danbad. Okay, another piece of information. Kishan and Balram was sleeping on the road whilst working at the tea shop in Danbad. Above all, I got the thing that we who grew up in the darkness value most of all, a uniform, a khaki uniform. There's a khaki uniform. Next day I went to the bank, the one that had a wall made of glass. I saw myself reflected in the glass panes, all in khaki. I walked back and forth in front of the bank a dozen times, just gaping at myself. If only they had given me a silver whistle, I would have been in paradise. Kishan came once a month to see me. Kusum had decided that I could keep 90 rupees a month for myself. The rest would go straight to Kishan, who would send it straight to her in the village. I gave him the money every month through the black bars of the rear gate, and we would now talk for a few minutes before the Nepali shouted, "That's enough! The boy has work to do now!" The work of a number 2 driver was simple, so this number 1 driver and number 2 driver is something to pay attention to. It was simple. If the number 1 driver, Ram Prasad, was busy driving the masters around town in the Honda City, and someone in the house wanted to go to the market or to a coal mine or to the train station, I got in the Maruti Suzuki and drove them there. Otherwise, I had to stay around the house and make myself useful. Now, I say they took me on as their driver. I don't exactly know how you organise your servants in China, but in India, or at least in the darkness, the rich don't have drivers, cooks, barbers and tailors. They simply have servants. Come on, Cat, on my lap, come on. Which means that any time I was not driving the car, I had to sweep the floor of the courtyard, make tea, clean cobwebs with a long broom, or chase a cow out of the compound. There was one thing I was not allowed to do, and this was to touch the Honda City. Ram Prasad alone had the right to drive it and clean it. In the evenings I'd watch him wash the sleek interior of the car with a soft cloth, and I'd burn with envy. I could see even from the outside that this was a beautiful modern car with all the necessary comforts, a speaker system, air conditioning, nice glossy leather seats, and a big stainless steel spittoon in the back. It must be like paradise to drive such a nice car. All I had was a battered old Maruti Suzuki. Now, a spittoon, for anyone who doesn't know, is... where's that word gone? A spittoon is where people spit if they feel the urge to spit. So it collects their spit. And that when I was a kid, they still had them on the trains because people who chew tobacco spit a lot. But they're pretty disgusting. One evening as I was watching, Mr. Ashok came and poked his nose around the car. I was discovering that he was a very inquisitive man. "What's that for, that shiny thing on your back?" "Spittoon, sir." "Ah, what's that for, that shiny thing in the back?" "Spittoon, sir." "What?" Ram Prasad explained. This spittoon was for the Stork who liked to chew pan. If he spat the pan out the window, the pan might streak the sides of the car, so he spat near his feet into the spittoon, which the driver washed and cleaned at the end of every ride. "Disgusting," Mr. Ashok said. He was asking about something else when Mukesh sir's son Roshan came running up to us with the plastic bat and ball in his hand. Ram Prasad snapped his fingers for me. Playing cricket with any brat in the household who wanted to play and letting him win handsomely was one of the prescribed duties of driver number 2. Mr. Ashok joined the game. He stood as the wicket-keeper while I bowled full tosses to the brat. I'm Azzaruddin, Captain of India, the boy shouted every time he hit a 6 or a 4. "Call yourself Gavaskar. Azzaruddin is a Muslim." It was the Stork. "Call yourself Gavaskar. Azzaruddin is a Muslim." It was the Stork. He had come into the courtyard to watch. Mr. Ashok said, "Father, what a silly thing to say. Hindu or Muslim, what difference does it make?" "Oh, you young people and your modern ideas," the Stork said. "You keep modern ideas for Ashok." He put his hands on me. "I have to steal the driver, Roshan. I'm sorry, you'll have him back in an hour, okay?" The Stork had a special use for driver number 2. I can highlight special use here. He had bad legs with blue veins in them, and he had been told by a doctor to sit in the courtyard in the evening with his feet in warm water and have them massaged by a servant. I had to heat water on the stove, carry it into the courtyard, and then lift the old man's feet up one after the other and immerse them in the hot water and then massage them both gently. As I did this, he would close his eyes and moan. After half an hour, he would say, "The water's gone cold." And then I had to lift his feet out one at a time from the bucket and carry the bucket into the toilet. The water in it was dark, dead hair and bits of skin floated on it. I had to fill the bucket with fresh hot water and bring it back. As I was massaging, the two sons pulled up chairs and sat down by their father to talk. Ram Prasad would bring out a full bottle of golden liquid and pour it into 3 glasses and drop ice cubes in their glasses and hand 1 glass to each of them. The sons would wait for the father to take the first sip and say, "Ah, whiskey! How would we survive this country without it?" And then the talking would start. The more they talked, the faster I massaged. They talked about politics, coal, and about your country, China. Somehow these things, politics, coal, China, were linked to the family fortunes of the Stork. And dimly I understood that my own fate, since I was part of the family now, was linked to these 3 things as well. The chatter of coal and China got mixed up with the aroma of whiskey from the glasses, the stench of sweat rising up from the Stork's feet, dipped in the warm water, the flakiness of his skin, and the light jabs of sandaled feet of Mr. Ashok or the mongoose when they bumped into my back in the process of moving about. I absorbed everything. That's the amazing thing about entrepreneurs. We're like sponges. We absorb and grow. All right. I absorbed everything. I'm keeping that because he's absorbing everything. A sharp blow landed on my head. I looked up and saw the Stork with his palm still raised over my skull, glaring at me. "Know what that was for?" "Yes, sir," I said with a big smile on my face. "Good." A minute later, he hit me on the head again. "Tell him what it was for, Father. I don't think he knows. Fellow, you're pressing too hard. You're too excited. Father is getting annoyed. Slow down." "Yes, sir." "Do you have to hit the servants, Father?" "This is not America, son. Don't ask questions like that." "Why can't I ask questions?" "They expect us from us, Ashok. Remember that. They respect us for it." I think, do you have to hit the servants? Now, Pinky Madam never joined in these conversations except to play badminton with Ram Prasad, which she did wearing dark sunglasses. She never left her room. I wondered what was going on with her. Was she having a fight with her husband? Was he not sticking it to her well in bed? When the Stork said, "The water's gone cold," for the 2nd time and took his feet out of the bucket, my work was done. I splashed the cold water down the sink. I washed my hands for 10 minutes and dried them and washed them again, but it made no difference. No matter how much you wash your hands after you've massaged a man's foot, the smell of his old flaky skin will stay on your skin for an entire day. Now, this foot washing business, I haven't really highlighted any particular quotes in there, but the washing of the feet and that idea of doing demeaning, degrading work is really important. This is not like ordinary wage labour. This is very intimate and very degrading. Not something anyone would ever choose to do. There was only one activity that servant number 1 and servant number 2 had to do together. At least once a week around 6 o'clock, Ram Prasad and I left the house and went down the main road until we got to a store with a sign that said, "Jackpot English Liquor Shop. Indian-made foreign liquor sold here." I should explain to you, Mr. Jabal, that in this country we have 2 kinds of men, Indian liquor men and English liquor men. Indian liquor was for village boys like me, toddy, Iraq, country hooch. English liquor naturally is for the rich. Rum, whiskey, beer, gin. Anything the English left behind. Is there a Chinese liquor, Mr. Premier? I'd love to take a sip. One of the most important duties of driver number 1 was to come to Jackpot once a week and buy a bottle of the most expensive whisky for the Stork and his sons. It was part of servant protocol, though don't ask me why, that the junior driver accompany him on this outing. I guess I was supposed to make sure he did not run away with the bottle. Coloured bottles of various sizes were stacked up on the jackpot's shelves, and 2 teenagers behind the counter struggled to take orders from the men shouting at them. On the white wall to the side of the shop there were hundreds of names of liquor brands written in a dripping red paint, with subdivided into 5 categories: beer, rum, whiskey, gin and vodka. So the PDF file I have here is the table that's in it. Hasn't worked out well, but it's just got a list of whiskies under those ones: whiskey first class, second class and third class, and a list of names. So under the first class, Black Dog Teachers and about 69. Second class was Royal Challenge, Royal Stag and Bagpiper, and third class was Royal Choice and Wild Horse. And then it says even cheaper whiskey is available. Ask at the counter, and then vodka as well. So it was a small store, and at least 50 men were crammed into the 10 feet of space in front of the counter, each yelling at the top of his voice while waving rupee notes of the higher denominations. Kingfisher strong, 1 litre. Old Monk, half bottle. Thunderbolt, Thunderbolt. They were not going to be drinking this liquor. I could tell from their torn and dirty shirts that they were only servants like Ram Prasad and me, come to buy English liquor for their masters. If we came after 8 o'clock on a weekend night to jackpot, it was like a civil war in front of the counter. I had to keep the men at bay while Ram Prasad shoved his way to the counter and yelled, "Black Dog, full bottle!" Black Dog was the first name in the first class category of whisky. It was the only thing that the Stork and his sons drank. Ram Prasad would get the liquor, and then I would swat at the other servants and fight for some space to get us out while he cradled the bottle in his arms. It was the only time we were ever like a team. On our way back to the house, Ram Prasad would always stop by the side of the road and slide the Black Dog out of its cardboard box. He said this was to check that the jackpot hadn't cheated us. I knew he was lying. He just wanted to hold the bottle. He wanted to hold the full virgin bottle of first-class whisky in his hand. He wanted to imagine that he was buying it for himself. Then he would slide the bottle back into the cardboard box and return to the house, me behind him, my eyes still dazzled by the sight of so much English liquor. At night, while Ram Prasad snored from his bed, I lay on the floor with my head resting on my palms. I was staring at the ceiling and thinking how the Stork's 2 sons were as different from each other as night and day. Mukesh Sir was small and dark and ugly and very shrewd. We would have called him the mongoose back home, and in fact Mukesh Sir is called the mongoose through most of the text, so just remember that. And his physical description: dark, ugly, and his character very shrewd. He had been married for some years to a homely wife who was turning fat on schedule after having 2 children, both boys. This fellow, this mongoose, did not have his father's body, but he had his father's mind. If he ever saw me waste even one moment, he would shout, "Driver, don't loiter there, clean the car." "Cleaned it already, sir." "Then take a broom and sweep the courtyard." Mr. Ashok had his father's body. He was tall and broad and handsome. I'm going to highlight that. Tall and broad and handsome. Like a landlord's son should be. In the evenings I saw him play badminton with his wife in the compound of the house. She wore pants. I gaped. Who had ever seen a woman dressed in trousers before except in the movies? So Pinky Madam, who you'll remember as Ashok's wife, wears pants, which is not what traditional attire is for Indian women. I assumed at first she was an American, one of those magical things he had brought home from New York, like his accent and the fruit-flavoured perfume he had put on his face after shaving. 2 days later, Ram Prasad and the slanty-eyed Nepali were gossiping. I took a broom, began sweeping the courtyard and edged closer and closer to them. So Balram's at his old tricks again of listening into conversations. He gets to hear about Pinky Madam. "She's a Christian, did you know?" "No way." "Yes, and he married her." "They married in America. When we Indians go there, we lose all respect for caste," the Nepali said. The old man was dead set against the marriage. Her people were not happy either. So how did it happen? The Nepali glared at me. Hey, are you eavesdropping on us? No, sir. One morning there was a knocking on the door of the driver's quarters, and when I went out, Pinky Madam was standing with 2 rackets in her hand. A net had been tied between 2 poles in one corner of the courtyard. She got on one side of the net and I got on the other. She hit the shuttle. It rose up and then fell near my foot. Hey, move! Hit it back! Sorry, madam, I'm so sorry. I'd never played this game before. I hit the shuttle back to her and it went straight into the net. Oh, you're useless! Where is that other driver? Ram Prasad dashed up to the net at once. He had been watching the game all the time from the side. He knew exactly how to play badminton. I watched him hit the shuttle cleanly over the net and match her shot for shot, and my belly burned. Is there any hatred on earth like the hatred of the number 2 servant for the number 1? Now, this relationship between these two guys is important, because I think you've got to kind of think about the levels of Indian society and how this text kind of builds up this picture of people just kind of competing with each other, using each other, taking advantage of each other, exploiting each other from one end of society to the other end. And this way that the 2 servants compete with each other and ultimately exploit each other is an important example that you could weave into a discussion of the text. So this quote, is there any hatred on earth like the hatred of the number 2 servant for the number 1 servant? Now, I mean, I think the idea is that people are pitted against each other. Instead of finding common ground and a way of working together and supporting each other, people are pitted against each other. And later on, when the idea of the rooster coop is introduced, it'll be that idea again, that people within this society, within Indian society, are able to see other people being treated badly, taken advantage of, exploited, but instead of banding together and resisting collectively, resisting as a group, they either, they're just out for themselves, or they actively engage in the same kind of exploitation. And, it's basically the only way people can sort of see of getting ahead. So is there any hatred on earth like the hatred of the number 2 servant for the number 1? The idea that the person who's just a little bit underneath, not far, just a little bit lesser, wants to claw his way up a little bit more. Though we slept in the same room just a few feet apart, we never said a word to each other, never a hello or how's your mother doing, nothing. I could feel heat radiate out from him all night. I knew he was cursing me and putting spells on me in his sleep. So he began every day by bowing in front of at least 20 pictures of various gods he kept in his side of the room and saying, Om, Om, Om. As he did this, he looked at me through the corner of his eye as if to say, don't you pray, what are you, a Naxal? One evening I went to the market and bought 24 of the cheapest idols of Hanuman and Ram I could find and brought them back and packed them into the room. So both of us now had the same number of gods in the room, and we drowned out each other's prayers in the morning while bowing before our respective deities. The Nepali was hand in hand with Ram Prasad. One day he burst into my room and put a big plastic bucket down on the floor with a thud. Do you like dogs, village boy? He asked with a big smile. There were 2 white Pomeranians in the house, Cuddles and Puddles. The rich expect their dogs to be treated like humans, you see. They expect their dogs to be pampered and walked and petted and even washed. And guess who had to do the washing? I got down on my knees and began scrubbing the dogs, then lathering them and foaming them and then washing them down and taking a blow dryer and drying their skin, and I took them around the compound on a chain while the king of Nepal sat in a corner and shouted, don't pull the chain so hard, they're worth more than you are. So the dogs are worth more than Balram. They're worth more than you are. Not just in terms of money, but in terms of how much they're cared for. And the idea is the competition between the servants. He's the king of Nepal because he's just one slight little tiny rung higher. By the time I was done with puddles and cuddles, I walked back, sniffing my hands. The only thing that can take the smell of dog skin off a servant's hands is the smell of his master's skin. All right, so these are two things that Balram has to do that are placed in this novel to show, they're there for a reason, and they're there to show that his work is demeaning and degrading to him. He's subservient. He has to do exactly what he's told, even though he's repulsed by the work that he has to do. Mr. Ashok was standing outside my room. I ran up to him and bowed low. He went into the room. I followed, still crouched over. He bent low to make his way through the doorway. The doorway was built for undernourished servants, not for a tall, well-fed master like him. He looked at the ceiling dubiously. "How awful," he said. "How awful," he said. Until then I had never noticed how the paint on the ceiling was peeling off in large flakes and how there were spiderwebs in every corner. I'd been so happy in this room until now. "Why is there such a smell? Open the windows." He sat down on Rampersad's bed and poked it with his fingertips. It felt hard. I immediately stopped being jealous of Rampersad. And so I saw the room with his eyes, smelled it with his nose, poked it with his fingers. I had already begun to digest my master. He looked in my direction but avoided my gaze as if he were guilty about something. This phrase here, I had already begun to digest my master. This doesn't yet have much significance, but as the novel goes on, he's not only learning from Ashok, he eventually becomes Ashok. He begins to imitate his way of dressing and speaking and all sorts of things. And in the end, he actually takes on his actual name and calls himself Ashok Sharma. He looked in my direction but avoided my gaze as if he was guilty about something. "You and Rampersad will both get a better room to sleep in, and separate beds. And some privacy." "Please don't do that, sir. This place is like a palace for us." That made him feel better. He looked at me. So this is again that idea that they have to be massaging the egos and the consciences of their bosses by telling them that no, they don't want any more money. No, they're happy with how they are and so forth. "You're from Laxmanga, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." "I was born in Laxmanga, but I haven't seen it since." "Were you born there too?" "Yes, sir, born and raised there." "What's it like?" Before I could answer, he said, "It must be so nice." "Oh, like paradise, sir." He looked me up and down from head to toe, the way I had been looking at him ever since I had come to the house. His eyes seemed full of wonder. How could two such contrasting specimens of humanity be produced by the same soil, sunlight and water? "Well, I want to go there today," he said, getting up from his bed. "I want to see my birthplace. You'll drive me?" "Yes, sir." Going home, and in my uniform, driving the Stork's car, chatting up his son and daughter-in-law. I was ready to fall at his feet and kiss them. The Stork had wanted to come along with us, and that would really make it a grand entry for me into the village, but at the last minute he decided to stay back. In the end, it was just Mr. Ashok and Pinky Madam whom I was taking in the Honda City out into the countryside towards Laxmanga. It was the first time I was driving the two of them. Rampersad had had the privilege until now. I still wasn't used to the Honda City, which is a moody car with a mind of its own, as I've said. I just prayed to the gods, all of them, not to let me make a mistake. They said nothing for half an hour. Sometimes you can feel as a driver when there is tension in the car. It raises the temperature inside. The woman inside the car was very angry. "Why are we going to this place in the middle of nowhere, Ashoki?" Her voice breaking the silence at last. "It's my ancestral village, Pinky. Wouldn't you like to see it? I was born there, but father sent me away as a boy. There was some trouble with the communist guerrillas then. I thought we could—" "Have you decided on a return date?" she asked suddenly. "I mean to New York." "No, not yet. We'll get one soon." He was silent for a minute. My ears were really wide open now. If they went back to America, would they no longer need a second driver in the home? So, of course, this would be panicking Balram. Remember how difficult it was for him to get this job in the first place. She said nothing, but I swear I could hear teeth gritting. Mr. Ashok had no clue, though. He began humming a film song until she said, "What a fucking joke." "What was that?" "You lied about returning to America, didn't you, Ashok? You're never going back, are you? There's a driver in the car, Pinky. I'll explain everything later." "Oh, what does he matter? He's only the driver, and you're just changing the topic again." A lovely fragrance filled the car, and I knew that she must have moved about and adjusted her clothes. "Why do we even need a driver? Why can't you drive like you used to?" "Pinky, that was New York. You can't drive in India. Just look at this traffic. No one follows any rules. People run across the road like crazy. Look at that." A tractor was coming down the road at full speed, belching out a nice thick plume of black diesel from its exhaust pipe. "It's on the wrong side of the road. The driver of that tractor hasn't even noticed." "I hadn't noticed either." "Well, I suppose you are meant to drive on the left side of the road, but until then I had never known anyone to get agitated over this rule. And just look at the diesel it's spewing out. If I drive here, Pinky, I'll go completely mad." We drove along a river, and then the tar road came to an end, and I took them along a bumpy track, and even through a small marketplace with 3 more or less identical shops selling more or less identical items of kerosene, incense and rice. Everyone stared at us. Some children began running alongside the car. Mr. Ashok waved at them and tried to get Pinky Madam to do the same. The children disappeared. We had crossed a line they could not follow us beyond. We were in the landlord's quarter. The caretaker was waiting at the gate of the Stork's mansion. He opened the door of the car even before I had brought it to a full stop and touched Mr. Ashok's feet. "Little prince, you're here at last, you're here at last." The wild boar came to have lunch with Mr. Ashok and Pinky Madam. He was their uncle after all. As soon as I saw him enter the mansion for lunch, I went to the kitchen and told the caretaker, "I love Mr. Ashok so much, you must let me serve him lunch." The cook agreed, and I got to take my first good look at the wild boar in years. He was older than I remembered, and more bent over, but his teeth were exactly the same, sharp and blackened, with 2 distinctive hooked ones curving up by the side. They ate in the dining room, a magnificent place with high ceilings, heavy old-fashioned furniture all around, and a huge chandelier. "Ah, there's our chandelier." "It's a lovely old mansion," Mr. Ashok said. "Everything's gorgeous in here." "Except the chandelier. It's a bit tacky," she said. "Your father loves chandeliers," the wild boar said. "He wanted us to put one up in the bathroom here. Did you know that? I'm serious." When the caretaker brought out the dishes and put them on the table, Mr. Ashok looked at them and said, "Don't you have anything vegetarian? I don't eat meat." "I've never heard of a landlord who was vegetarian," the wild boar said. "It's not natural. You need meat to toughen you up." He opened his lips and showed his curved teeth. "I don't believe in killing animals needlessly. I knew vegetarians in America, and I think they're right." "What crazy ideas do you boys pick up?" the old man said. "You're a landlord. It's the Brahmins who are vegetarian, not us." Brahmins are another caste. After lunch, I walked the dishes. After lunch, I washed the dishes. I helped the caretaker make tea. My master was taken care of. Now it was time to see my family. I went out the mansion by the back door. Well, they had beaten me to it. My family had all come to the mansion, and they were around the Honda City, staring at it with pride, though too frightened to touch it. Kishan raised his hand. I hadn't seen him since he left Danbad and came back home to work in the fields. That was 3 months ago. I bent down and touched his feet and held on to them for seconds longer than needed, because I knew the moment I let go he would bugger me badly. I hadn't sent any money home for the past 2 months. "Ah, so now he remembers his family at last," he said, shaking me off his feet. "Has he thought about us at all?" "Forgive me, brother. You've not sent any money for months. You forgot our arrangement. Forgive me, forgive me." But they weren't really angry. For the first time I can remember, I got more attention than the water buffalo. Most lavish in her fussing naturally was sly old Kusum. So lavish in her fussing. So she's lavish in her fussing. She's making a big deal of him, trying to suck up to him a bit now because he's got money coming in, and she wants to make sure she can control him. Who kept grinning at me and rubbing her forearms. "Oh, how I used to stuff your mouth with sweets as a child," she said, trying to squeeze my cheeks. She was too frightened of my uniform to try and touch me anywhere else. They almost carried me on their backs to the old house, I tell you. The neighbours were waiting there to see my uniform. I was shown the children that had been born in the family since I had left and forced to kiss them on the forehead. My aunt Lila had 2 children when I was gone. Cousin Papu's wife Leela had had a child. The family was larger, the needs were more. I was chastised by all for not sending money each month. Kusum beat her head with her fist. She wailed into the neighbour's house, "My grandson has a job and he still forces me to work. This is the fate of an old woman in this world." "Marry him off," the neighbours yelled. "That's the only way to tame the wild ones like him." "Yes," Kusum said, "that's a good idea." She grinned and rubbed her forearms. "A very good idea. We can marry him off, I think." Kishan had a lot of news for me, and since this was the darkness, all of it was bad news. The great socialist was as corrupt as ever. We might keep that too. The great socialist, as corrupt as ever. The fighting between the Naxal terrorists and the landlords was getting bloodier. Small people like us were getting caught in between. There were private armies on both sides. I could keep that. Private armies on both sides going around to shoot and torture people suspected of sympathising with the other. This is pretty diabolical lives that they're leading, isn't it? "Life had become hell here," he said, "but we're so happy you're out of this mess. You've got a uniform and a good master." Kishan had changed. He was thinner and darker. His neck tendons were sticking out in high relief above his deep clavicles. He had become, all of a sudden, my father. There you go. And remember those clavicles were likened to a dog's collar earlier in chapter 1? Remember his father had those clavicles that looked like a dog's collar? I saw Kusum grinning and rubbing her forearms and talking of my marriage. She served me lunch herself. As she ladled the curry onto my plate, she had made chicken just for me. So remember, he's never had chicken before. She said, "We'll fix up the wedding for later this year, okay? We've already found someone for you, a nice plump duck. The moment she has her menstrual cycle, she can come here." So that we're talking about it. They've chosen a child for his wife, who they're waiting just to become physically mature, and then she'll be married off, obviously without having any choice either. There was red curried bone and flesh in front of me, and it seemed to me that they had served me flesh from Kishan's own body on that plate. This is, for me, one of my favourite quotes here, because this is Balram. He's seeing this chicken that he's been given. He's thinking of the way that his brother has been basically, used by the family. And when he's looking at the chicken, it's like he can see that his brother's been served up. "Granny," I said, looking at the large piece of red curried meat, "give me more time. I'm not ready to be married." Her jaw dropped. "What do you mean, not yet? You'll do what we want," she smiled. "Now eat it, dear. I made chicken just for you." I said, "No." "Eat it." She pushed the plate closer to me. Everyone in the household stopped to look at our tussle. Granny squinted. "What are you, a Brahmin? Eat, eat." "No." I pushed the plate so hard it went flying to a corner and hit the wall and spilled the red curry on the floor. "I said I'm not marrying." She was too stunned even to yell. Kishan got up and tried to stop me as I left, but I pushed him to the side. He fell down hard, and I just walked out of the house. The children ran along with me outside. Dirty little brats born to one aunt or the other, whose names I did not want to know, whose hair I did not want to touch. Gradually they got the message and went back. So this is how he regards this family. Dirty little brats born to one aunt or another, whose names I did not want to know. They're his cousins. I left behind the temple, the market, the hogs and the sewage. Then I was alone at the pond, the black fort on the hill in front of me. Near the water's edge I sat down, gnashing my teeth. I couldn't stop thinking of Kishan's body. They were eating him alive in there. They would do the same thing to him that they did to Father, scoop him out from the inside and leave him weak. They would do the same things they did to Father, scoop him out from the inside and leave him weak and helpless. until he got TB and died on the floor of a government hospital waiting for some doctor to see him spitting blood on this wall and that. There was a splashing noise. The water buffalo in the pond lifted its water lily covered head. It peeked at me. A crane stood watching me on one leg. I walked until the water came up to my neck and then swam past lotuses and water lilies, past the water buffalo, past tadpoles and fish and giant boulders fallen from the fort. Up on the broken ramparts, the monkeys gathered to look at me. I had started climbing up the hill. So I think that's meant to be symbolic of what he has to do to get out of the darkness. You are familiar already with my love of poetry, and especially the works of the four Muslim poets acknowledged to be the greatest of all time. Now Iqbal, who is one of the four, has written this remarkable poem in which he imagines that he is the devil standing up for his rights at a moment when God tries to bully him. The devil, according to the Muslims, was once God's sidekick until he fought with him and went freelance. And ever since, there has been a war of brains between God and the devil. This is what Iqbal writes about. The exact words of the poem I can't remember, but it goes something like this. It says, I am powerful, I am huge. Become my servant again. Devil says, ha! When I remember Iqbal's devil, as I do often, lying here under my chandelier, I think of a little black figure in a wet khaki uniform who is climbing up the entranceway to a black fort. There he stands now, 1 foot on the ramparts of the black fort, surrounded by a group of amazed monkeys. Up in the blue skies, God spreads his palm over the plains below, showing this little man Laxmanga and its little tributary of the Ganga and all that lies beyond, 1 million such villages, 1 billion such people. And God asked the little man, isn't it all wonderful? Isn't it all grand? Aren't you grateful to be my servant? And then I see this small black man in the wet khaki uniform start to shake as if he has gone mad with anger before delivering to the Almighty a gesture of thanks for having created the world this particular way instead of all the other ways it could have been created. I see this little man in the khaki uniform spitting at God again and again as I watch the black blades of the midget fans slice the light from the chandelier again and again. So it's not easy, this stuff, I don't think. So he's saying he is a devil, he is the devil, but then how good is God? God has created this situation, and God wants Balaam to follow God, but then what kind of world has God created? And then Balaam, he describes himself, this small black man in a wet khaki uniform, shaking as if he's gone mad with anger. So that moment when he's on the fort, he finally sees everything. He goes mad with anger and then delivers to God a gesture of thanks for having created the world in this way. And the gesture of thanks that he's giving God is spitting. He's not really thanking him. He's saying this is disgusting. And he's tossing away that idea that he should have any respect for the way that society's been created or those in charge of that society who made it that way, whether that is truly God or whether it is people in power that construct the society with all of its layers of privilege and power. Half an hour later, when I came down the hill, I went straight to the Stork's mansion. Mr. Ashok and Pinky Madam were waiting for me by the Honda City. And you remember that moment he describes in the first chapter when he climbed up to the fort. He finishes chapter 1 with that moment. And he says that's 8 months after that he slit Mr. Ashok's throat. So something happens in that moment where he suddenly gets it all. And it comes out, not just out of Ashok, but also his family and what's happened to his brother Kishan and so forth. So half an hour later, when I came down the hill, I went straight to the Stork's mansion. Mr. Ashok and Pinky Madam were waiting for me by the Honda City. Where the hell have you been, driver? She yelled. We've been waiting. Sorry, madam, I said, grinning to her. I'm very sorry. Have a heart, Pinky. He was seeing his family. You know how close they are to their families in the darkness. Kusum, Lutu, Auntie, and all the other women were gathered by the side of the road as we drove out. They gaped at me, stunned that I wasn't coming to apologise. I saw Kusum clench her gnarled fists at me. I put my foot down on the accelerator and drove right past all of them. We went through the market square. I took a look at the tea shop. The human spiders were at work at the tables. The rickshaws were arranged in a line at the back, and the cyclist with the poster for the daily pornographic film on the other side of the river had just begun his rounds. So this is that nature of his village and where he's from, and there's this idea that this is a timeless way that things are, where you've got the people in the tea shops who never get to become men, who are just forever slaves. You've got the rickshaws with, people like his father who don't get to sit at the tables and who crouch, the stick-like men, and the sort of degrading pornographic movies, the idea that it's pretty gross in that way as well, just continuing on and on and on. I drove through the greenery, through the bushes and the trees and the water buffaloes lazing in muddy ponds, past the creepers and the bushes, past the paddy fields, past the coconut palms, past the bananas, past the neems and the banyans, past the wild grass with the faces of the water buffaloes peeping through. A small half-naked boy was riding a buffalo by the side of the road. When he saw us, he pumped his fists and shouted in joy, and I wanted to shout back at him, "Yes, I feel that way too. I'm never going back there." "Can you talk now, Ashiki? Can you answer my question?" "All right, look, when I came back, I really thought it was going to be for 2 months, Pinky. But things have changed so much in India. There are so many more things I could do here than in New York." "Ashiki, that's bullshit." "No, it's not. Really, it's not. The way things are changing in India now, this place is going to be like America in 10 years. Plus, I like it better here. We've got people to take care of us here, our drivers, our watchmen, our masseurs. Where in New York would you find someone to bring you tea and sweet biscuits while you're lying in bed, the way Ram Bahadur does for us? You know he's been in my family for 30 years. We call him a servant, but he's part of our family. Dad found this Nepali wandering around Downbad one day with a gun in his hand and said..." He stopped talking all at once. "Did you see that, Pinky?" "What?" "Did you see that, what the driver did?" My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea what I'd just done. Mr. Ashok leaned forward and said, "Driver, you just touched your finger to your eye, didn't you?" "Yes, sir." "Didn't you see, Pinky? We just drove past a temple." Mr. Ashok pointed to the tall conical structure with the black entwining snakes painted down the sides that we had left behind. "So the driver..." He touched me on the shoulder. "What's your name?" "Balram." So he doesn't even know his name. He's all this time and he doesn't even know his name. It's been months he's been living with him. "Balram. So Balram here touched his eye as a mark of respect. The villagers are so religious in the darkness." That seemed to have impressed the two of them, so I put my finger to my eye a moment later again. "What's that for, driver? I don't see any temples around." We just drove past a sacred tree, sir. I was offering my respects." "Did you hear that? They worship nature. It's beautiful, isn't it?" The two of them kept an eye open for every tree or temple we passed by and turned to me for a reaction of piety, which I gave them, of course, and with growing elaborateness, first just touching my eye, then my neck, then my clavicle, and even my nipples. They were convinced I was the most religious servant on earth. "Take that, Ram Prasad!" Our way back into Dhanbad was blocked. There was a truck parked on the road. It was full of men with red headbands shouting slogans. "Rise against the rich! Support the great socialists! Keep the landlords out!" Soon another set of trucks drove by. The men in them wore green headbands and shouted at men in the other truck. A fight was about to break out. "What's going on?" Pinky Madam asked in an alarmed tone of voice. "Relax," he said. "It's election time, that's all." Now, to explain to you what was going on with all of this shouting from the trucks, I will have to tell you about democracy, something that you Chinese, I am aware, are not very familiar with, but that will have to wait for tomorrow, Your Excellency. It's 2:44 a.m, the hour of degenerates, drug addicts and Bangalore-based entrepreneurs. So thank you very much for listening to the second chapter of The White Tiger. What you'll see is that the next chapter is called not the third night, but the fourth morning. We will do that one next, if I can ever get around to recording it.